is Mackenzie Dolan, and I'm going to be doing a review on chapters 1 through 7 and what I've learned. So for my chapter 1 review, I've learned about the first generations of computers and how they were vacuum tubes that controlled the flow of electrons. And then the second generation of computers were transistors. They were smaller, cheaper, more reliable than the first generation vacuum tubes. And then I also learned about the IoT, which are processors are embedded into products. You'll see this at home. You can manage your devices remotely, such as like starting your laundry or adjusting your thermostat before you get home. You'll see this in business with retail sensors when they track the inventory. Manufacturing sensors track monitor process. This is obviously businesses can see, their inventory and how much product they have. And you'll also see IoT in healthcare. You'll see them with prescription updates, patient reminders, blood pressure monitors. There's glucose monitors. And obviously you can check your statuses through your phone. And then I also learned about computer-aided manufacturing, which is abbreviated to CAM. This is when robots perform dangerous, detailed, work. And I included an image on the right of one of a robot just, performing a surgery. It's not an actual surgery, but it's a demonstration. And yeah, it's definitely helped advance with healthcare. With my chapter 2 review, I learned the different parts of a URL, which are the protocol, server address, domain name, path name, and web page file name. And then I can show you, I included a link below so I can label each part. So the protocol would include the HTTPS, and also these two. And then the server address would be the www.cengage.com. And then the domain name would just be, if I could do a little thing here, it would just be the cengage.com. And then after that would be the path name, which is the studentindex.html. Where are we at? And then the web page file name is just the index.html. Those are just the different parts of a URL. And then I also learned about e-commerce. This is business transactions on electronic networks such as the internet. There's business to business, business to consumer, consumer to consumer. With consumer to consumer, that's, online ads and auctions. And then, most e-commerce is business to business. And then I also learned about the CARS checklist, which is used to evaluate web pages. Obviously, you want to make sure whenever you go on a website that it's reliable. You want to check the credibility of it, the accuracy, reasonability, and the supportability. You want to make sure the page lists its sources. You have to make sure that they're trustworthy. Make sure the information is up to date and factual. And then we can move on to chapter 3. In chapter 3, I learned about a bit and a byte. A bit is the smallest unit of data a computer can process, and then a byte is a group of 8 bits. So 8 bits make up 1 byte. And then I also learned about the machine cycle, which is fetch, decode, execute, and then store. And then I also learned about the different types of RAM. There's, dynamic RAM, which is DRAM. It's volatile. It needs recharge constantly, which, could be a headache. And then I learned about static RAM, which is SRAM. It's volatile, less recharging, but, more expensive than the dynamic RAM. And then the magnetoresistive RAM, which is MRAM. It's non-volatile, magnetic charges retain its content without power. And then lastly, I learned about flash memory, which is non-volatile. It's inexpensive and fast. You'll see this lots of places. And then I made 2 different charts showing the differences between non-volatile and volatile. With non-volatile, the RAM doesn't lose its content when the power is removed. And then one example of this is ROM, which is permanently installed, on the motherboard, and it also contains BIOS. And then with volatile, this RAM loses its contents when the power is removed. And an example of this is RAM, which is stored on one or more chips called the motherboard. In Chapter 4, I learned about software as a service. It's a software distributed online for a subscription fee. You can pay monthly on this or yearly, whatever you decide to go with. And then I also learned about virtualization, which is a green computing initiative. Obviously, we're trying to advance our way towards making those better decisions with, green computing, which is, the virtualization is the practice of sharing resources such as servers or storage devices among computers and devices on a network. And then obviously that's limiting the number of computers that you need to perform these tasks. And then I also learned about the virtual machine, which allows a device or computer to run multiple operating systems. This makes, remote work easier. You'll see this because obviously since COVID, we've pushed towards remote work. So we've seen a lot of advances with that lately. And then I also learned about the different file sizes, which is the kilobyte, which is thousands of bytes of data, the megabyte, which is millions, the gigabyte, which is billions of bytes, and then the terabyte, which is trillions of bytes of data. My Chapter 5 review, I learned about a macro, which is a small program created to perform repetitive tasks. And then I also learned about a native app, which is written for a specific operating system. You'll see these, installed whenever you get a new operating system. I learned about the SQL, which is structured query language. It's used in relational databases. And relational databases contain a collection of tables organized in columns and rows. And then I also learned about the different graphic formats, which is, the bitmap, which is, it uncompresses files that code values for each pixel. I learned about TIFF, which is large image format used for print. I learned about JPEG, which is compressed file format, often used for photos. A GIF or GIF, however you want to pronounce it, is compressed graphics format that supports animations. I learned about PNG, which is compressed format that supports transparent backgrounds. And then obviously raw data, which is uncompressed and unprocessed data. And then in Chapter 6, this is all about, different cybersecurity and different attacks that you might see online. The first attacker type that I learned about is a broker. They're willing to sell your knowledge and vulnerability. And then I also learned about cyber criminals. They conduct cyber-related tasks for financial gain. They obviously want to make a profit off of your information. And then I learned about a hacktivist. They target, businesses or organizations on who they disagree. So it's definitely a direct attack. It's definitely planned on who they're attacking. And then I learned about different malware attacks. With ransom, it prevents a user's device from functioning until a fee is paid. So you might get a little pop-up window saying, pay this amount and then you can use your device. Other than that, you won't be able to use it. And then I learned about keylogger attacks, which it's capturing your screen image. The attackers will, look at the text that you're displaying on your screen to see your passwords or other sensitive information, and they can steal that. And then the Trojan, the malware that pretends to be a program performing normal activity. And then obviously social engineering attacks. There is phishing, which is a message or web announcement that attempts to trick the victim into giving info. So you'll get a pop-up that, it looks real, but it's not. So they're luring you in with that, hence, the word phishing. And then there's typo squatting, which is, registering a fake website. So users who misspell the URL are directed to that site. So you might, miss a letter when you're typing the website out, and that'll take you into the, typo squatting attack. And then I learned about biometrics. I knew that you could use unique characteristics such as your fingerprint when you're getting into your phone, or Face ID, to authenticate yourself. Some devices may use a scan of your eye, but I wasn't sure that the actual word describing that was biometrics. And then for my Chapter 7 review, we learned about different compressions and how you compress files. And two of them is a lossy compression, which discards some file data. You generally wouldn't notice this effect, even though it's getting rid of some file data. And then there's a lossless compression, which doesn't discard data. But whenever you end up opening that file, they're uncompressed. And then I learned about non-fungible token, which is your NFT, which is a digital identifier assigned to one file or version of digital graphic. I've known about NFTs, but I wasn't too sure of the actual term that it was abbreviated from. And then those go down into a blockchain, which is a database that includes lists or ordered records, which are called blocks. And then the blocks contain information about the NFT. And then I learned about the MIDI, which is a musical instrument digital interface. These are music file protocols used by devices to communicate with each other. You have different instructions for generating sounds. And this is my works cited for a couple of the images I used earlier. And yeah, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out.